So the way I connected with you over this book is a crazy ass story. It was the middle of the pandemic. I had actually just finished this book that I'd been procrastinating about forever. And Kathy Labriola received a junk email from me and wrote back and said, should I open it? I said, no. And she said, well, what's going on? And I said, I'm looking for a publisher. She said, get in touch with Eli. She has a deal with Rowman and Littlefield, and I think your book could fit.
And I had just been working with Kathy on her fantastic book. And now I can't remember the title. I still think of it by the original. I know, yeah. I still think of the original title, which is Polly Geezers. That is the title in my mind, and we changed it to something that was less affrontative for, various people. Although some people really identify as Polly Geezers. It's not necessarily we didn't mean it as a smear, but now I can't remember what we actually called it. I can't remember what's on the front of that book. Polyamorous Elders. Something like that. And that was a delightful book. I enjoyed working on that book so much. And Leanna, I really enjoyed working with you on your book. I think it's delightful, and one of the things I really like about your book are the little asides that you do it's really fantastic for the flow of the story, because you mostly talk about your life as the flow of the story, and then you've got these little asides.
And that was your idea.
Oh, really? I thought that was your idea.
No, it was your idea.
Oh, that was my... Oh, man, I have such good ideas. Holy shit. Well, you know what? I'm glad to hear that, because I was going to steal it from you. I was going to tell you I'm stealing it for my next book. But it was my idea from the beginning, so apparently I'm not stealing it.
See, what happened is there was this moment when Rowman and Littlefield was going to adopt it as a trade book, and then they couldn't. And so it had to become a textbook.
Yes.
And then with this textbook directive, you were saying we had to, put this story in context. Mm-hmm. And so I basically did a doctoral dissertation worth of research for all those little contextual boxes. Mm-hmm. And which, everything I discussed got a place. So if I was talking about abortion, I did this whole deep history on how abortion was handled in different cultures and in old Europe, and Roe versus Wade, and then right in the middle of all this we lost Roe versus Wade, and and so all of that got covered in my discussion of abortion.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that stands out to me that I remember discussing in terms of all the various minutiae, in a way, that you need to address was the various meanings of virginity that you were talking about.
You were so big on that. It was
because it's a big deal. Only straight people think about a singular virginity. Like, oh, if there's a penis in your vagina, then you've lost your virginity. Well, I have known some slutty ass lesbian women that are not virgins by any stretch of anyone's imagination, but there's never been a penis in there. So whose definition of virginity?
Many virginities.
Exactly. So but that kind of discussion that we just had right there took maybe 3 weeks, and email maybe not. We were pretty quick.
Yeah, but then to really develop it and go into the details of, okay, well, there's BDSM virginities. There's anal penetration virginities.
So many. Absolutely. So what gave you the idea to write the book in the first place?
Well, I was teaching a class called Gender, Sex, and Culture, and I had this assignment which involved a sex history, which came out of the Institute, where we had the sex history project.
And just for the folks out there, What's the institute?
Oh, the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality, where I did a mid to late career doctorate in sexology and did a dissertation on polyamory and jealousy. And so I liked that assignment, and I brought it to my students at the community colleges where I was teaching. And their typical engagement of the assignment was to talk about when they'd had their first intercourse. And that was their sex history. And I'd say, no, your history is more than that. It involves masturbation. It involves messages from your parents. It involves your engagement of nudity. It involves all kinds of other things. And in any case, I started saying, I should really do this assignment in detail. And I started looking at my life and said, well, largely, I've been a sex researcher. And it wasn't enough for me to just, have my own life and have my own partners and do the dance with them. But I just wanted to find out everything, whether I was going to really do it in terms of my whole life, or I was just going to, try it out. And so I started looking back and saying, oh my God, when I went to Mexico when I was 22, I was trying to figure out machismo, because in Berkeley, where I'd gone to undergrad, there was no such thing. Everybody was
and
trying
that was in the 80s, right?
No, that was the 70s.
The 70s.
I went to Berkeley in the early mid and 70s and graduated.
The heyday of machismo in the Bay Area, absolutely.
Well, no, it was a heyday of
the flower power.
No, well, it was the heyday of not being a male chauvinist and engaging feminism. And so I was all about engaging, feminine, I had all this information from the myth of the vaginal orgasm, which we had to read for women's studies classes, and reading Joni Blank's things and Betty Dodson's things, and all of that became part of my sex education. And then I come to Mexico where none of this had transpired, and I got to be with really romantic, pushy, dominant men that I'd never been with in Berkeley. And it was exciting. And it opened up all these other senses of what's possible.
So how did that, I know how that connects to your book in terms of it being included in the timeline, but how did that inspire you to write the book?
Well, I wanted to,
you know what? Fuck it. That's a terrible question. Let's move on past that question.
I think that is a difficult question.
That's a difficult question. How about this? How about this instead? If there's just pause in there, go ahead and edit this part. Clearly, among sex-positive people and sex-positive communities, you have been celebrated. Your book is so authentic and just kind of charts this long and super interesting story. But it's really quite authentic. You include a lot of details about yourself and kind of nitty-gritty sexuality. And I wonder how your brethren in the anthropology world have responded to that. How do people respond to you that aren't within the sex-positive world?
It varies. So we had the very first presentation on my book for a community college anthropology conference in January. And I did the whole show for them. And there was this sprinkling of people who got it and came up and wanted books and were going to order it for their classes. And then the rest of them, all they wanted to do was question me about some of the cheating data. Cause
right.
And it was just the rest of it was like, what? And it was really interesting because the same group of people I had done my sexual assault presentation to a couple of years earlier, and they loved it because it was dark. And it wasn't about sex positivity. It was about sexual assault research, changing perspectives on sexual assault, me admitting that I'd been raped. All that they could handle that. But this show that discussed how I figured out how orgasm worked, or how I had was exposed to BDSM without even knowing what it was, but liked it, and all that was just like over the top for them.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, that sounds like your focus on pleasure in this book was not something they wanted to hear, not only in the book, but also in the show. They were like, we can talk about sex over there, but pleasure is too close to home. We might feel a thing if we think about pleasure, and that's not acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, I do know some anthropologists that have adopted the book for their classes, but it's going to be an interesting sell, and we're bringing it to the AAA, the American Anthropology Association, in November, and hoping more folks engage it.
And is there anything that you wish you could have included in this book that you didn't get to put in this edition?
Oh, yeah. What happened is it was taking such a long time to get finalized that I started writing more chapters. And so there are more chapters. There's a chapter on my engagement of Japan and exploring geisha culture and exploring the sex trade in Japan and exploring just sort of what people say goes on and what really goes on. I would hear stories where all women are housewives, and then I'd go to an izakaya and find out that there's all these women who are professionals, and there's this, and that the geisha culture is this, but it's and it's really a discrete kind of thing. And so it was just like, that is going to be a chapter. And then there was this research I did some years ago on herpes, because I was just astounded at how our culture had engaged herpes in the 80s, where they basically took a condition, especially with oral herpes, that 90% of the population has, and medicalized it and created all this
pharmaceutical support.
Yeah, all this stuff making it like you could treat it. And so I have a chapter on that where I did all this research, largely to refute a boyfriend who didn't want to have sex with me because he thought I was horribly contagious. And so I did a research project for him that's in the book. And then I got to date a neurodivergent person for a while, and I had never done anything like this. And I ultimately, I generated both a compassion for what it is to be neurodivergent and to have behaviors and issues just be really other than what I was used to dealing with. And so I wrote a chapter about that. And who knows what other chapters I'll spin out by the time it's time for the next edition.
And do you think it'll be a next edition, or will it be a second book?
That's a good question. It really depends on how the publisher engages things and how much more material I manage to generate.
Right.
And all that.
So if that's a depends, you've had this incredibly adventurous global traveling life. What is next for you, adventurer?
Well, there's this place I've been wanting to go to for
What a surprise!
a really long time. Because anybody here who's ever taught anthropology knows about the Trobriand Islands.
Yes.
Because Malinowski was exiled there during World War II and wrote books like The Sexual Lives of Savages, and then there were these discussions of Trobriand cricket and how erotic it was, and I have just so wanted to go there. And it's been closed off because of COVID and wanting to keep the locals safe, but I'm gonna find my way there.
And is that near Indonesia?
It's basically Melanesia. It's, kind of adjacent to Papua New Guinea.
Okay.
And of course, I've been to Papua New Guinea, but I'd like to get to the Trobriands.
Because they're even more remote.
I think so.
Quite remote,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And who knows how much any of this will be accessible to me, but I'm going to give it a try.
Might as well. Absolutely. And so that's next in your travels. Are you writing anything new? Additional chapters for this book, obviously.
Yeah, we're working on additional chapters, and who knows where that's going to take me. And, and then I've been really involved with the solo theater piece, and that's been really fun. And at one point I was so busy procrastinating on the book and traveling different places that I thought, the only way I'm ever going to somehow finish this project is to just do a solo theater piece and not write the book. And so I started studying solo theater. And I thought, that'll be simple. It's not as long. It's you get to perform and dance and move, and that's always exciting to me. And so then the pandemic hit, and it was like, so you're going to do your solo theater piece in empty theater and have it live streamed. And that was like really uncomfortable. And so then I actually, because there was no place to travel to, I actually finished the book. And so then when the book was about to come out, I got in touch with my solo theater teacher, and I said, hey, I'd like to release the book with the theater piece. And so we worked really hard taking this 240-page book and making it into an hour-long show. And we realized it had to be structured differently. It had to open bright. It couldn't open the way the book opens, and it had to move and have all these little pieces that worked with it. And so that's what we have.
And is this your first piece, your first solo artist piece?
Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of storytelling, and as a kid, I did acting. Was part of the Palo Alto Children's Theater and acted there, and yeah.
And you've taken this show quite a few different places. Where have you been?
Well, we began with Solo Fest at the Whitefire Theater, and we took it to some.
And was that in LA?
That's in LA, yeah. And then the Hollywood Fringe Festival, also in LA. But we took it to conferences. Took it to several anthropology conferences, the Southwest Anthropology Conference, and then we took it to Loving More, the polyamory conference that met in Philadelphia last spring, and then to Sex Pause Conference in Burbank, and there's a couple more that are lined up.
Fantastic. What else should we know about this evening's performance?
Well, this evening's performance is like one of the more intimate ones we've had, but it was the right one for Portland because I only know who I know in Portland. And the thought of like renting a big theater and having it be empty was really like not comfortable to me. So this is a living room performance, and I'm really excited about it because there's people here from different pieces of my life and a couple people I've never met. So I'm like ready to do it.
Fantastic.
All right.
Shall we take questions or shall we save them for afterwards?
Well, we could have a couple questions now, and there'll be more later.
And if you don't have questions right now, that's fine.
Yeah.
You're welcome to ask them or not.
I'm curious because we were talking about creating the book and creating the theater piece, and the way you choreographed the two was different. And so I'm curious about those differences, but I'm also curious how, as a writer and a performer, how you exploring the performance piece and the theatricality of that is then coming back to influence your writing.
So this question is about how was the writing different from the writing of the book? How was that different from the writing of the performance piece, and how has that then influenced the writing in turn?
Ooh, okay. Well, the kind of performance theater that I've been doing involves dialogue and playing different characters. And so I have characters that speak Spanish. I have a character who speaks a little Yiddish. I have people who speak in New Guinea and African Pidgin. And I have people like my parents who are characters in it. And the book, has some dialogue, but it doesn't have the liveliness of the theater piece. And also the book is denser. And like I kept tightening the theater piece to get to the essence of these different stories rather than all the detail you would have access to if you were using it in your anthropology class and your professor wanted to make sure you really covered the bases on some of these topics. And the book has a glossary.
With fun terms to look up, fun and exciting terms.
All kinds of terms, as defined by me. And then it has an index, and so it's a book, and the theater piece is a little dense compared to other solo theater pieces because I drew from the book, and so there's that piece of it. So it's a little different than the kind of storytelling and dancing and singing you see in other kinds of solo theater.
Well, very exciting. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And we shall get started in 10 minutes, 5 minutes? Some number of minutes.
Yeah, replenish your drinks, get another snack, and then we'll start the theater piece. Okay, thank you.